The courtroom was silent, unusually silent. No coughs, no whispers, not even the shuffle of papers. Just the sound of a single name being called. Elijah Brooks, a 17-year-old black teenager, stood, wearing a county-issued jumpsuit. His wrists were bound in cuffs that looked far too heavy for someone his age. He walked forward slowly, each step echoing like a drumbeat in the massive courtroom. Judge Hamilton barely looked up. "You understand the charges against you?" Elijah nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, but if I may, I'd like to speak for myself." The room stirred, murmurs, confusion, laughter even. Defendants didn't speak here, not without a lawyer, not like this. The judge raised an eyebrow. "You're not an attorney, son." "No, sir, but I know the Constitution grants me the right to defend myself." The judge leaned back, intrigued but skeptical. "Proceed." Then it happened. Elijah took a deep breath, and in the next 2 minutes recited case law, quoted legal precedents, and exposed inconsistencies in the police report with the precision of a seasoned litigator. People leaned forward in their seats. Even the stenographer paused typing, and as Elijah finished, the judge said nothing. He simply stared. No one could believe what they'd just witnessed. Before we dive deeper, make sure you subscribe and turn on the bell, because stories like this, you won't find them anywhere else. Real, raw, unforgettable. Be part of a community that sees the unseen. Don't miss what's coming next. It might just change how you see everything. Elijah Brooks wasn't supposed to make it past 13. Born in the crumbling outskirts of Newark, New Jersey, Elijah was raised by his grandmother, Martha Brooks, a church-going woman who cleaned houses during the day and prayed through the night. His mother, arrested for possession when he was 5, never came back. His father, a question mark. But Elijah was different. At 4, he read cereal boxes like novels. By 6, he was correcting the grammar in church bulletins. And at 10, he borrowed a copy of the Federalist Papers from the school library, for fun. He didn't fit anywhere. Too smart for the block, too black for the honors program, too quiet for the chaos around him. Teachers often thought he was cheating when he aced exams. Other kids called him the freak, the dictionary, or worse. Still, Elijah pushed forward. He studied by flashlight when the power was cut. He memorized legal definitions while other kids memorized lyrics. He watched courtroom trials online the way most teens binge-watch Netflix. His dream, to become a civil rights lawyer. Not for fame, not for money, for justice, for his mom, for himself, for all the kids like him who were told they'd never make it. His sanctuary was the public library downtown. It smelled of old pages and dust. But to Elijah, it smelled like freedom. There, surrounded by casebooks and legal journals, he imagined a different life, one where he wore a suit, stood tall in court, and made people listen. His biggest supporter was Martha. She didn't understand much of what he read, but she'd boil tea, press his clothes, and whisper, "God gave you this mind for a reason. Don't waste it, baby." At 17, he earned a full scholarship to an elite law prep program at Hudson University. He was finally out, finally seen, finally valued. But the world doesn't always let you rise without trying to pull you back down. And Elijah was about to learn just how fast everything could fall apart. Elijah's first day at Hudson University felt like stepping into another planet. Brick buildings covered in ivy, students with sleek laptops, coffee in hand, talking about internships and summer programs abroad. For the first time, he wasn't the smartest person in the room, and he loved it. He soaked it all in. Every lecture, every debate, every late-night study session in the law library. Elijah wasn't just trying to pass. He wanted to master the game, to understand the system from the inside out, to learn its language so well that no one could ever use it against him again. He'd sit in on mock trials, even when he wasn't assigned. He started a student group focused on racial justice and the legal system. Professors began to notice. One of them, Professor Hayes, pulled him aside after class and said, "You don't just have a brain for this, Elijah. You have a purpose." Those words stayed with him. He called his grandma every night, told her about his classes, about how it felt to walk across campus without looking over his shoulder. For the first time, he felt like he belonged somewhere. But dreams come with weight, and Elijah carried more than most. While his peers had safety nets, he had none. One mistake, one accusation could shatter everything. And then came Brian Carter, a third-year law student, well-connected, charming, and entitled. Carter didn't like being challenged, especially not by a freshman from Newark who made him look average in front of professors. Their conflict started small: interrupted answers in class, eye rolls, sarcastic remarks. But Elijah didn't back down. He argued with precision, with truth, and truth sometimes is dangerous. One afternoon, after a heated classroom debate, Elijah returned to his dorm to find 2 campus security officers waiting. A student had reported a stolen tablet, and Elijah was the only person seen near the common area. He was stunned. "Check the cameras," he said. "We will," one officer replied. "But for now, you need to come with us." They didn't find anything in his room, but the accusation was enough. A formal investigation was launched. He was suspended from classes pending review. Just like that, the world he'd fought so hard to reach began slipping through his fingers. The worst part, the tablet was later found in Brian Carter's backpack, but that wouldn't come out until much later. For now, Elijah was marked, not as brilliant, but as dangerous. The police report was thin, just a student statement and a vague timeline. But it didn't matter. Elijah was escorted off campus in front of classmates and faculty. No handcuffs, but it didn't need them. The shame was heavier than steel. News traveled fast. By the next day, anonymous posts flooded the student forum. Knew he was too good to be true. Affirmative action gone wrong. Watch your stuff around the scholarship, kids. He tried to call his grandma that night, but she didn't answer. She always answered. Elijah spent the weekend in a holding cell. Not jail, yet, but cold enough, loud enough, cruel enough. He kept repeating, "They'll fix this. This is a mistake." But no one looked at him like it was. On Monday morning, he was released on bail. As he stepped outside, he saw Sandra Mitchell, the public defender assigned to his case. She looked tired but kind. "Elijah, I've read your file. You're not a criminal, but this is serious." He nodded, numb. "I didn't do it." "I believe you, but belief won't be enough." Back at home, things only got worse. Martha was on the floor when he walked in. Heart attack. She had tried to call him all weekend. He never got the messages. The ambulance came too late. At the hospital, the doctor's voice blurred into a single sentence. "We did everything we could." And just like that, she was gone. The woman who raised him, his anchor, his protector. He sat alone in the hospital hallway, surrounded by strangers. No calls, no comfort, just the echo of Martha's voice in his head. "Don't let them take your light." But in that moment, Elijah had nothing left to protect. Back at the apartment, the silence screamed. Her teacup was still on the table, her Bible still open, her scent still in the air. He collapsed onto the floor, shaking, angry, broken. "Why?" he whispered. "Why now?" He punched the wall until his knuckles bled. Not out of violence, but desperation, grief, rage, the unfairness of it all. He didn't care about school, about law, about justice. What justice? He was 17, alone, accused, suspended, and now an orphan. Whatever light he had left, it flickered dangerously close to going out. The courtroom lights felt brighter than usual, almost punishing. Elijah stood before the judge again, not as a student, not as a prodigy, but as a defendant. The boy genius from Newark, the scholarship kid, the legal mind in training, now faced petty theft charges in a real courtroom. The irony was suffocating. He said nothing, not out of guilt, but because speaking had stopped working. Words hadn't saved his scholarship, hadn't stopped the suspension, hadn't kept his grandma alive. And now, in the eyes of the court, he wasn't a brilliant student. He was a statistic. After his public hearing, the judge denied his request to return home. Something about community risk and pending review. Sandra Mitchell tried to argue. She pointed out the lack of evidence, the missing tablet now mysteriously recovered, but the decision had been made. He was remanded to a juvenile detention facility. The first night in his cell was quiet. Too quiet. Just the hum of the fluorescent light and the distant clang of metal doors. Elijah lay on a stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling. No books, no papers, no voice to explain himself. He was surrounded by other boys, some angry, some broken, some dangerous. A few eyed him with curiosity. Most ignored him. He wasn't street enough to earn respect, not quiet enough to disappear. The next day, lunch brought the first real blow. A kid twice his size knocked Elijah's tray out of his hands and laughed. "What's up, Harvard? Not hungry?" Elijah didn't respond. He walked away, sat down alone, and tried to breathe. Later that week, he was caught reading a torn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird he'd found on a shelf. A guard saw it, snatched it from him, and laughed. "You ain't in class no more, genius." The days blurred, cold showers, loud nights, sleepless mornings. And then came Mr. Wallace, older, quiet, kept mostly to himself. He noticed Elijah scribbling case notes on scraps of napkin during dinner one evening. "You know law?" Wallace asked, leaning closer. Elijah hesitated. "I used to." Wallace nodded. "Used to be a paralegal 20 years ago, before everything changed." That night, Wallace passed him a book through the bars, The State and the Justice. Old, pages yellowed, corners bent. "You might want this," he said. Elijah stared at the cover for a long time before opening it. The weight of it felt familiar, like hope, distant but real. Each night he read. Under his blanket by moonlight he devoured every sentence. It was the first time he'd felt alive since Martha died. But the pain didn't disappear. One afternoon, he overheard 2 guards mocking his case. "That's the problem with these smart ones. Think they're better than the system until the system swallows them whole." Elijah clenched his jaw. He wanted to scream, to throw the book, to disappear. Instead, he wrote, in the margins, on napkins, on toilet paper, he outlined his defense, cited precedents, dissected inconsistencies in his arrest report. He didn't know if it would matter, but it was something. It was survival. One night, he dreamed of Martha. She stood in their kitchen, humming an old gospel tune, stirring tea. She looked at him and smiled. "You're not done, baby." Not yet. When he woke, his pillow was wet with tears, but his chest felt lighter. That morning, he asked the guard for a pencil, a real one, and he started writing, not to prove he was innocent, but to remind himself that he still was. If this story is touching something deep inside you, take a moment. Like this video if you've ever felt misunderstood, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. Others might need to read what you say. Sometimes one comment can light someone else's way. Days turned to weeks. The facility's routine never changed. Breakfast, chores, locked recreation, lights out. But inside Elijah, something had shifted. It wasn't sudden. It was quiet, like dawn breaking behind clouds. A small, steady return of will. It began with a letter. Mr. Wallace handed it to him during lunch. "It's from your public defender," he said. "Sandra." Elijah opened it slowly, fingers trembling. "Elijah, I read your notes. They're brilliant. I showed them to a colleague who teaches law at Rutgers. He asked if he could read more. Keep writing. I'm still fighting for your case, and I believe in you." Hard, a spark. Not a blaze. Not yet, but real. He started requesting books. Law books, history, psychology. Most were denied, but a few made it through. He read them cover to cover. Every word was fuel. Each paragraph he wrote in his defense became sharper, more confident. He began practicing arguments in his cell, whispering to the air. At night, Wallace listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes correcting. "You're not just building a case, son," he said once. "You're building a voice. Don't lose it." Elijah remembered something Martha used to say: "God doesn't waste pain." The grief was still there always, but now it walked beside him, not ahead. During a group therapy session, mandatory but usually meaningless, Elijah spoke, really spoke, not about his case, but about what it meant to be a black boy accused without question. About the fear of becoming invisible, even when you're doing everything right. About how silence can feel safer than truth. The counselor, surprised, asked him to lead a discussion the next week. He agreed, and for the first time, the other boys looked at him differently, not as weak, but as someone who had survived something they all understood. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was reclaiming himself. The words he once used to escape now became the tools to rebuild. His mind sharpened again. His heart, though bruised, began to beat with purpose. He wrote a letter to Professor Hayes, told him everything: the accusation, the arrest, the loss of his grandmother, the writing, the hope. 2 weeks later, he received a reply. "You have a courtroom waiting for you, Elijah. Don't let this place be your end. Make it your origin story." That night, he opened the state and the justice again, and for the first time, read it not as a prisoner trying to escape, but as a man preparing to rise. Elijah's request to represent himself in court was met with silence, then laughter. "You think this is a debate club?" one of the guards joked, but Sandra Mitchell didn't laugh. She'd seen his notes, his outlines, his arguments, and more than that, she saw his resolve. She filed the motion. It took weeks. Bureaucracy is slow, especially for kids who don't come from money or power. But eventually the court granted Elijah the rare opportunity to speak in his own defense, not just as a witness, as his own counsel. Back in his cell, Elijah stared at the official document, hands trembling. This was real. He had less than 30 days, and no law degree. But he had something that couldn't be taught: fire. Each morning, he woke before lights on and paced the small space of his cell, rehearsing his statements. Mr. Wallace tested him, threw questions, challenged logic. It wasn't easy. Sometimes Elijah stumbled, forgot citations, lost his calm. But each time he came back sharper. Sandra smuggled in notes from law professors who were now secretly mentoring him, a network of legal minds rooting for the boy genius who refused to be erased. He rewrote his entire defense, once, twice, 7 times, and with each draft his voice became clearer, less emotional, more surgical. He stopped just arguing that he was innocent. He started proving the flaws in the investigation: lack of probable cause, no evidence of possession, procedural errors. The day of the mock hearing inside the facility, Elijah stood in the recreation room, facing Wallace, who played the role of the prosecutor. "You're not here to tell your story," Wallace reminded him. "You're here to dismantle theirs." Elijah nodded, and he did. The guards watching were stunned, not just by the confidence, but by the knowledge, the command. "Who the hell taught this kid?" one whispered. "He taught himself," Wallace replied, proud. But Elijah knew this was only the beginning. The real trial was still ahead. And this time, there would be cameras, reporters, a courtroom packed with people expecting to see a troubled teen beg for leniency. They wouldn't. They'd see something else. Someone else. Elijah wasn't walking in as a defendant anymore. He was stepping in as a storm. The closer the court date came, the heavier the weight felt on Elijah's shoulders. Confidence wasn't linear. Some mornings he woke sharp, focused, repeating his opening statement like a prayer. Other days, doubt clawed at him like a shadow, whispering he wasn't good enough, smart enough, old enough. He was still just a kid. And the system, it wasn't made for kids like him to win. One afternoon, the facility's head guard pulled him aside. "You know this courtroom performance won't change anything, right?" he said. "You'll still walk out with a record. You'll still be marked." Elijah said nothing. But later that night, he sat in his cell and stared at his notes frozen. For the first time in weeks, he didn't write, didn't rehearse. What was the point? Why keep fighting a machine built to crush him? Mr. Wallace noticed the silence. He didn't say much, just handed Elijah a folded piece of paper. Inside was a photo, faded but powerful. It was of Wallace, young, standing outside a courthouse in a cheap suit, smiling. "I was you once," Wallace said. "Smart, hungry, but I believed the lie, that I couldn't win. So I stopped trying, and here I am." He pointed to Elijah's chest. "Don't be me, be more." It hit hard, but it helped. Still, the world outside hadn't changed. Brian Carter, the student who falsely accused him, had gone quiet. No apology, no accountability. His name was kept off official documents, thanks to his family's influence. Elijah wanted justice, but the law wasn't always about fairness. Sometimes it was about power, and Elijah didn't have any, or so they thought. 3 days before the trial, a campus security officer, retired and bitter, reached out to Sandra Mitchell. He'd seen the original surveillance footage. It showed Elijah walking by the common room, yes, but it also showed Carter entering after him, alone. The tablet was never stolen. It had been hidden by Carter. The video had been buried by someone higher up, possibly a dean, possibly Carter's family lawyer. It wasn't enough to press charges, but it was enough to raise serious questions. Sandra brought it to the judge. The motion to dismiss was denied. "Let him present it at trial," Judge Hamilton said. "Let's see if the boy knows how to fight." Back at the facility, Elijah received the news. He didn't smile. He nodded. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. He picked up his notes again, made revisions, adjusted tone, removed emotion, added facts, layered truth. He wasn't walking into court hoping for mercy. He was coming for clarity. And this time the courtroom wouldn't just hear him, it would remember him. The day of the trial arrived, with grey skies and bitter cold. The courthouse stood tall and intimidating, its stone facade echoing the weight of every story that had unfolded inside. For Elijah, it wasn't just a building. It was the place where he would either reclaim his name or be buried under it. The courtroom was full. Journalists sat in the back, scribbling notes. Law students whispered about the genius kid representing himself. A few professors from Hudson were there too, including Professor Hayes, who hadn't said a word to Elijah since the accusation, but had quietly come to witness the outcome. Elijah entered in a plain suit, borrowed, slightly oversized, but clean. No cuffs, no chains, just his voice, and a thick folder of notes clutched in his hands. Judge Hamilton stared down from the bench, skeptical as always. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "you may begin." Elijah took a breath, just one. Then he stepped forward. "Your Honor," he began, voice calm, steady, "today I stand before you not as a criminal, but as a student, a son, a grandson, and most importantly, as someone who still believes in the law, even when it did not believe in me." The courtroom was silent. He walked the jury through the facts, methodically, meticulously. He pointed out the inconsistencies in the police report, quoted case law from memory, showed the timeline gaps, revealed the buried footage Sandra had uncovered. Then he turned to the core of his defense. Intent, that's what this case hinges on. And I ask you, where is the intent in simply walking by a room? He paused. In a society where perception becomes prosecution, truth must be louder than fear. I didn't steal anything. But more than that, I didn't deserve to be presumed guilty for existing in a space where people never expected someone like me to belong. He looked at the judge, then the jury, then, briefly, at the cameras. This isn't just about me. It's about how many times voices like mine go unheard, about how often our potential is silenced before it can speak. Sandra watched from the side, tears in her eyes. Mr. Wallace, sitting in the last row under special permission, gripped the edge of his seat. When Elijah finished, he stepped back and sat down. No drama, no theatrics, just silence. The prosecutor tried to counter, but the wind had been taken out of the state's case. Even Carter's name, unspoken in court, hung like smoke over the proceedings. Judge Hamilton recessed for deliberation. An hour passed, then another. Finally, the courtroom doors opened. Everyone stood. Hamilton returned to the bench. He adjusted his glasses, looked at Elijah for a long moment. "In the matter of the state versus Elijah Brooks," he said, "this court finds the defendant not guilty." Gasps. A murmur. A few claps quickly silenced by the bailiff. But Elijah didn't move, didn't smile. He just closed his eyes, and for the first time in months, breathed. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Microphones, questions, flashing lights. Elijah stepped out into the cold, shoulders back, eyes forward. "I have nothing to add," he said. "The record speaks for itself." And he walked away, not as the accused, not as the victim, but as a man who took back everything they tried to strip from him: his name, his future, his power. Elijah's story isn't just about a courtroom victory. It's about how quickly the world judges a young black man with potential as a threat instead of a promise. It's about a system that punishes brilliance when it doesn't come packaged in privilege. And most of all, it's about resilience. Not the loud, cinematic kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that survives in silence, in grief, in isolation. For many watching Elijah's trial, the shock wasn't that he defended himself so brilliantly. It was that he ever had to, because he'd done everything right. He studied, he worked, he respected the rules. And still, it took nothing more than a single lie, unquestioned, unchallenged, to unravel his life. But Elijah's greatest triumph wasn't the verdict. It was his refusal to disappear. He reminded the world that intelligence can wear any skin, that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it speaks calmly with facts under pressure. That being underestimated isn't a curse. It's a setup for a kind of impact no one sees coming. Elijah didn't just win his freedom. He exposed a broken process, inspired hundreds, and proved that when truth is spoken with clarity and conviction, even the most powerful institutions have no choice but to listen. After the trial, Elijah didn't return to Hudson University. He declined their offer. Yes, they invited him back, publicly even. They wanted to clean the stain of what happened, but Elijah wasn't interested in returning to a place that stood silent when he needed them to speak. Instead, he transferred to a smaller college with a civil rights program, one that had reached out, not to protect its image, but to support his mission. He graduated early, then law school. By 24, he passed the bar. And by 25, Elijah Brooks opened the Martha Justice Project, named after the woman who never stopped believing in him. The foundation offers free legal defense to underrepresented youth facing unjust charges, along with mentorship, education, and advocacy. He walks into courtrooms now not as the accused, but as a defender. And when he speaks, judges remember his name. So do juries. So do the kids sitting in holding cells who think they have no voice. Elijah visits juvenile facilities once a month. He brings books. He listens. He tells his story, not to glorify the pain, but to illuminate the path out of it. Because for every Elijah, there are 1,000 more waiting to be seen, and he won't stop until they are. How many Elijahs are out there right now? Boys and girls with brilliance in their bones, locked behind false assumptions, buried by systems that never gave them a chance to breathe. Kids whose only crime is daring to dream in a world that doubts them. Elijah Brooks stood up not just for himself, but for every silent voice. Now it's your turn. What would you have done in his place? Would you have kept fighting? Would you have spoken up? Tell us in the comments. Your voice matters. If Elijah's story moved you, share it. Let someone else see what's possible when pain meets purpose. Subscribe to O Peso da Escolha for more real stories like this. Stories that reveal the raw, beautiful, brutal power of choice. Because in the end, it's not about how we fall. It's about what we do when the world says we can't rise again. And we rise anyway. Don't scroll past this. Speak, share, stand up, just like Elijah did.